The sky over Manhattan was turning orange when Elena sat perched on the kitchen counter, her bare feet swinging lightly above the floor. In the living room, her father and his three longtime friends were laughing loud, their voices booming over the low hum of the TV. Cigarette smoke curled into the ceiling, carrying with it decades of history. Wars survived, women lost, and whiskey shared over quiet grief. She had grown up hearing stories about these men who used to fight side by side, who never bowed their heads, who always walked like they owned every inch of the room. They were older now, slower, but there was something unshaken in their presence, especially in Marcus. Marcus wasn't like the others. While the rest laughed easily and sipped their drinks without pause, Marcus watched, observed. His movements were slow, calculated, his eyes a dark map of things unsaid. He didn't talk much, but when he did, the room went quiet. Elena noticed that. She noticed everything about him, his silence, his stillness, the way he didn't try to impress anyone. That alone made her lean in. She felt his gaze before she saw it. Soft, steady, curious, not intrusive. It lingered just long enough to be felt, never long enough to be questioned. Her breath caught in her throat. Something about him made time fold over itself. Later that night, after the men left and the noise faded, she sat alone in the kitchen staring at the empty glass he had touched. Her thoughts wandered. And when her phone buzzed the next afternoon with a message from an unknown number, she already knew. "You looked good last night," the message read. "Want something even better?" She didn't reply right away. She didn't have to. Her mind was already racing with the memory of the way he looked at her, calm, certain, like he had already imagined this next step. Elena had always been bold, drawn to danger and quiet disguises. But this wasn't just a thrill. It was something else, something deliberate. She told her father she needed to run some errands, threw on a soft gray sweater and black jeans, and left the apartment without thinking twice. She barely remembered the drive to Marcus's apartment on the east side, only the way her hands trembled slightly on the wheel. He lived in a quiet building that smelled faintly of old books and fresh paint. When she knocked, he opened the door like he'd been standing there all morning. No smile, no small talk. Just a man with steady hands who reached for her waist and pulled her inside, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. He didn't speak, just moved. She let herself move with him. They didn't rush. He touched her like he was listening, like every part of her had something to say, and he wanted to hear it. He didn't pull, didn't force, just watched, observed. And when she looked up, his eyes were already there, reading her like a familiar page. His fingers were slow, mapping her silently, responding to each breath, each shift. When he kissed her, it wasn't a beginning. It felt like a continuation of something that had already started long before. Later, they sat on the couch. Jazz played softly from an old record player in the corner. The city lights bled through the windows, casting golden lines across the wooden floor. Marcus leaned back, arm draped casually behind her, a mug of coffee in his other hand. She studied the angle of his jaw, the small scar on his eyebrow, the way he didn't ask questions. "Do you always move like that?" she asked, almost in a whisper. He didn't look at her right away. "Only when it matters." And that was the thing. He made everything feel like it mattered. He didn't overwhelm her with words or compliments. He didn't charm her with promises. He just made space for her to exist exactly as she was. No edits, no masks. Their days turned into a rhythm. Sometimes she came to him. Sometimes he walked into her world. They rarely made plans. They didn't need to. The connection was unspoken, like the silence between notes in a song. It was in the way his hand grazed hers during coffee, the way her head rested on his chest like it belonged there. Once they sat in his apartment watching the rain blur the skyline. She turned to him and said, "I don't want to be a complication in your life." "You're not," he said simply. "You're the one thing that makes it feel simple." It was the kind of honesty that disarmed her. No drama, no push and pull, just truth, clear and cutting. Still, there were parts of him she didn't understand. There were photographs tucked in drawers, names in his phone he never called. And sometimes, she caught him staring out the window with a look that didn't belong in the present, like he was carrying something old, something unfinished. But she never asked. Not because she didn't want to know, but because she respected the quiet. One evening, as she was about to leave, Marcus stopped her at the door. "Elena," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. You don't have to keep leaving. You know that, right? She smiled, pressing her forehead to his. I don't want to disappear. I just don't know what this is. He didn't try to label it. He just nodded and whispered, neither do I, but it's real. That was enough. Weeks passed and New York turned colder. The leaves on the sidewalks curled and darkened. People rushed with their collars pulled high. But Elena didn't feel the cold. She felt the fire Marcus had lit in her. Quiet, steady, burning under the surface. Then one night he didn't answer her message. No reply. No call. No explanation. She waited. One day, then two. Her chest felt tight. The silence wasn't like before. It wasn't comforting, it was empty. She drove to his building. Climbed the stairs with a pit in her stomach. The apartment door was locked. Lights off. A neighbor stepped out with a bag of groceries. He left, the woman said casually. Packed up 2 nights ago. Said he was going back to California. Something about unfinished business. Elena stood frozen. No goodbye. No note. Just gone. She walked back down into the street. The city moved around her as if nothing had happened. As if the world hadn't just shifted under her feet. But she didn't cry. Instead, she walked. All the way to the river. Sat on a bench as wind tangled her hair. She stared at the water, trying to feel something other than the ache. He had come into her life like a whisper and left the same way. But what he left behind wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. She had known someone who saw her without looking twice, touched her without taking anything. Loved her maybe in the only way he knew how, through silence, through stillness, through presence. And maybe that was all she needed. Maybe some stories weren't meant to end with forever. Maybe they just had to be felt, deeply, briefly, and without regret.